A 2-minute and 12-second clip on Twitter for Briahna Joy Gray and Andrew Yang's interview. And then it says the full interview is right here, and it's youtube.com/watch?V =BXTMI3.
Yeah, force the vote. Let's talk about force the vote.
Force the vote.
So that's Andrew Yang excited. Yeah, force the vote. Like he supports it, or he says, yeah, let's talk about it. Okay, so let's find out what he believes.
So they could make it so that Nancy Pelosi can't be Speaker of the House unless she concedes to certain demands. And what the main demand that's being pushed right now is that she have a floor vote on Medicare for all. And the idea being not because there's a high likelihood that we would win had been that the House would pass Medicare for all. There are only 118 co-sponsors in the House. Now, Democrats have a majority, and if every Democrat in the House voted for Medicare for all, we could pass Medicare for all, and I think we should reflect on what it means that all the House Democrats wouldn't pass Medicare for all in the middle of a global pandemic. That's a real, I think, indictment of our politics right now. But, you know, a lot of people are pushing back against the idea, saying, well, you're not going to win anyway, so what's the point? It's all performative. Well, for a lot of us, especially on the left, if you don't do something that can grab attention, if you don't do something performative, if you don't do the Cupid shuffle, if you don't figure out a way to marry the performative and the substantive, to say force the vote and let's hold up Nancy Pelosi's speakership, let's threaten Nancy Pelosi, who, obviously politically, because she is one of the least liked. Her favorabilities are worse than Trump. 3/4 of Americans think she should step down. Let's make her the center of the story, and also wet it with some substantive policy goals. Let's get Richard Neal out of the Ways and Means Committee because he's going to block Medicare for all. Let's get rid of PayGo because that stands in the way of us being able to get all kinds of big-ticket items that PayGo requires you to fund them as you go along, and it makes it very difficult. We kind of put those things together because the average American doesn't want to hear a bunch of wonkery about PayGo, but they might be interested in Nancy Pelosi, right? And vice versa. And you got to learn how to do a stunt, how to figure out how to exploit the system, which is, very biased against the interest of the left, biased against the interest of working people.
I like the idea of forcing the vote. I mean, you should be able to vote on a policy that a lot of people support, and if you're not for it, then you don't vote for it, and then we know, or I mean, it's like it shouldn't be that controversial in my mind.
Me either.
Well,
so that was Andrew Yang that says it shouldn't really be controversial. So what's going on? Here's a little bit more Briahna Joy Gray on bad faith.
Bernie Sanders running around saying Republicans come out, or whatever, socialism, whatever they think is a turnoff, and there was the kind of losses that we saw a month ago, then it would be plastered on every billboard in America that Bernie Sanders, almost lost the House and is a catastrophic risk to the Democratic Party. Yeah, Joe Biden did that. The Lincoln Project, fools, were able to extract $70 million out of even more foolish Democrats.
My God.
And the result was that more registered Republicans voted for Donald Trump in 2020 than they did in 2016. And then Joe Biden turned around and has rewarded Republicans, putting them on his transition team, considering them for prime cabinet spots. Meanwhile, the Bernie wing is completely unrepresented in his administration. So that's all to say, to me, that's more of an argument to challenge Democratic power, to challenge Democratic leadership, to show, even if it's performative, I don't care. I don't see that as a slight. I don't see that as a derogatory term. Because there is an aspect to politics that is theater that movements like the Tea Party and the right wing have always understood. And I think that even if I can't prove or point necessarily to tangible outcomes, I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I know what would happen if we were to force the floor vote. But I know what will happen if we don't. And that is that our best case scenario is that in 2 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, we can still be talking about the fight for Medicare for all. Meanwhile, 68,000 people die every year from a lack of health insurance, and who knows what it's about to be, what the results are going to be after this year or two of pandemic. And I just am really struggling evil or that, there aren't people who can do good things with their wealth. The idea, you say winner take all, obviously. I will often hear people say if I tweet out an Intercept article,
quickly land on public support for journalism. And then there are a lot of folks that are like, oh, you can't have
going off of like YouTube comments, and I could have very easily been wrong. But I can perceive that there's a certain kind of doomer pessimism about new people and new ideas among the left that can sometimes hurt candidates that could be really successful.
Steve Mnuchin
program had just decided maybe back to Donald Trump, because he's a lot more capable and had actually enacted a much more extreme racial pogrom in New York City than Donald Trump managed, although he certainly tried, because Michael Bloomberg isn't incompetent, unlike Donald Trump. And people were, willing to vote for him. There were people were saying they wouldn't vote for Bernie, but they would vote for Bloomberg if he was the eventual nominee. So what authority do we have? What line in the sand is there? If Democrats are never willing to say enough is enough, this is not the kind of candidate we want representing us, this is not the kind of party we are. Is there any policy that they won't throw under the bus? Is there any kind of candidate that we won't accept? And if the answer is no, we should expect that the party moves more and more and more to the right over the course of history, the way it's been doing. So what's going to stop that movement? I think that ranked choice voting is one of those things. I think greater union participation and figuring out how to organize massive blocks of voters that can meaningfully and credibly threaten Democrats to say, we are going to withhold our vote, we are not going to mobilize our population unless you adhere to some basic standards, like the fact that 88% of Democrats want Medicare for all, but barely half of the House of Representatives will co-sponsor the bill. What? The idea people are arguing against force to vote who are like, well, it wouldn't pass anyway. That's not an indictment of the idea of force to vote. That's a colossal indictment of elected representatives, Democratic representatives in the House. We are in the middle of a global pandemic where 15 million people have just lost their employer-based health care. All of the people who are arguing if you like your health care, you can keep it during the primary election should be put on the mat by a journalist every single day asking, have you revised your position? Do you want to apologize for misleading the public and spreading right-wing talking points? Because none of that was true. And now you have to answer to 15 million Americans, 15 million, who in the middle of a global health crisis have no recourse with respect to paying for their health care. That's unconscionable. And yet we don't have a media apparatus who's willing to do that. And for people like you and those on the left who are willing to stand up and articulate some, break from consensus are ridiculed, called traitors to the party, accused of sexism or some other kind of identity-based bias, and there's no real reckoning at any point. So I do think that, yes, ranked choice voting needs to be pushed. Democrats will never do it because that's one of the main sources of their power, but we have to agitate for it. We need to start going to town halls, take a lesson out of the Tea Party's playbook, which was a lesson out of Saul Alinsky's playbook on the left, and make life uncomfortable for our elected representatives until they start actually representing us. And that goes for some of the people who have been progressive champions as well. It's not about throwing them out or saying they're terrible people or questioning their motives, but it's about understanding that there is a such thing as institutional creep. When you are in office, your motives start to change, and you have an incentive in maintaining your status and your position, and you have all these incentives to raise money and give money to the party so that you can get hierarchy and status within your committee positions and all of these kinds of things, which are important, but shouldn't come at the expense of the people that you were elected to represent. We need to give money to independent candidates so that they can rely on the people and be beholden to the people instead of being beholden to corporate interests. We need to push for campaign finance reform so they don't have the option to be dependent on corporate interests. And we all just have to stay a lot more engaged and have confidence.
This is an interview with Andrew Yang.
Keep the faith that if we do these things and then we stand together and we recognize it's not left-right, that it is top-down, and the 99% stands together, it is possible for us to have a better world. It is possible.
There's a little bit of a monologue there.
Pessimism cow us.
Oh, you're like the antidote to cynicism. I love it. anyone who needs a reminder of the fact that we can do great things. Bree's got a podcast every week with Virgil, Virgil's more of a downer than Bree. So
yes, we play a little bit of a yin-yang, good cop, bad cop situation.
You're a very good team. So for you personally, I'm sure there was like a sense of depletion after the campaign, and then you've just gotten kind of your legs underneath you in terms of this new podcast and your new independent media project. Would the plan be to just keep on building your voice and work until like the next candidate catches fire and manages to get your attention?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I'm interested to see what happens electorally, but I'm also really interested to start to explore non-electoral activism. You know, there's been a little bit of a circular firing squad on the left this past week or two about Force the Vote, and to try to break out of that, I'm reaching out to union leaders and organizers to try to come on and give us a more concrete sense of how change happens. You know, a lot of left pundits like to say, well, your idea doesn't work because it really requires organizing and it requires grassroots support. I mean, like, that's great, but don't we play a role in helping to germinate